From Nganglam, our route took us due north back into the highlands, initially following the course of various fast-flowing rivers. Stops along the route produced some good birds, such as this female blue-throated blue flycatcher, scarlet minivet, a perched crested, or alternatively oriental, honey buzzard, probably migrating up the valleys, a singing black-crested bulbul, and a gorgeous male crimson sunbird. As we climbed, the valleys became steeper. A bamboo grove revealed, amongst others, this initially skulking female bay woodpecker, which thankfully chose to show a little better. We took breakfast at a lovely section of the river, complete with recently made large cat paw prints. At the junction of the Drangme and Kurichu valleys, our trip was about to become a little more adventurous. Here a new road has been built, linking Nganglam with Bhutan's main lateral highway. We were possibly the first tourists to travel along it. At times, it seemed hard to believe a road could have been constructed here. It was certainly spectacular, although not for the faint-hearted. By lunchtime, we had reached a chorlton overlooking the Kurichu. As we ate, we were entertained by a Pallas's fish eagle patrolling the valley. Further north, at Gyalposhing, we found a few Himalayan bulbuls, feeding alongside red-vented bulbuls. They're a common resident, but only here in the east of Bhutan. Other roadside birds included a party of white-crested laughing thrushes. We'd seen them previously on the trip, but these were views to be savoured. By late afternoon, we had reached Yongkola and Trogan Villa, our base for exploring this area over the next few days. We had time to explore around the villa before dusk. A male grey bush chat showed particularly well. They are an altitudinal migrant, and it was presumably settling back onto breeding territory. Much like this male blue-capped rock thrush. Other typical birds around the small settlement here included oriental turtle dove, russet sparrow. This is a male. Black bulbul, and red-vented bulbul. Interestingly, those here appear to be of the eastern rather than the Himalayan form, showing pale underparts, little scaling on obviously brown upperparts, and brown ear coverts. Yongkola sits on the famous Limithang Road, part of Bhutan's main lateral highway that stretches from Limithang to the southeast and Senghor to the northwest. It is probably Bhutan's best-known birding region. Whilst here, we focused on the areas above Yongkola. We began our first morning here below an impressive rock face, home to a colony of Nepal house martins. Their nests were at various stages of construction. They are best separated from Asian house martins by their black throats and black undertail coverts, both visible on this nest-building individual. A pair of scarlet finches were on the slopes above the rock face, the male being appropriately plumaged, and the female with an olive-brown head and scaled below. Close by was this male verditer flycatcher, and back down the road another. Plus whiskered euhenas. At 2,360 metres, Nganglam is a tiny settlement. It has a patch of roadside bamboo, which as usual produced a few new species, like this mountain tailor bird, a beautiful golden babbler, a red-billed Leothrix, and a streak-breasted scimitar babbler. It had been calling for a while, but took a little longer to tempt out into the open. This rufous sibia was not new. They had been regularly seen during the trip, but when seen this well, they are certainly worthy of attention. We drove up to around 2,600 metres for breakfast, with some good birds in the locality. Interestingly, both of Bhutan's barwing species were present. This hoary-throated was new. We'd seen rusty-fronted barwing previously, but although both are altitudinal migrants, it is unusual at this height. There was also a yellow-browed tit, ashy-throated warbler, buff-barred warbler, a male green-tailed sunbird, and another rufous sibia. Sadly, rain soon set in, although we did briefly see a male orange-bellied niltava. We descended back towards Yonkola to avoid the worst of the rain higher up. Birding was slow, however, although in the afternoon we did find a feeding golden-throated barbet. And yellow-throated fulvetas, which were new for the trip. As was a rusty-cheeked scimitar babbler, and a flock of nearly 60 yellow-breasted greenfinches. On our second day along the Limithang Road, we again braved low cloud and rain. Frustrating, but as always there were still birds to be found. Like this male Darjeeling woodpecker. A largely concealed striated laughing thrush, one of a small flock. A male rufous gorgeted flycatcher, again only with a tiny rufous patch on the lower throat. And a grey-cheeked warbler, possibly present around a nest site. It was a little brighter mid-morning, tempting out an ashy drongo. A male orange-bellied leaf-bird. A rather confiding male Asian emerald cuckoo. And a perched Himalayan buzzard. By midday the rain had returned, but we decided nonetheless to head towards Namling again. And the gamble paid off, with a spotted elatura out in the open. Formerly called spotted wren babbler, but now considered to be unrelated to any babbler and with no close living relatives. On our last morning at Yonkola, we left our lodge in better weather at last. And the day began exceptionally well, as at one of our first stops, we were rewarded with fabulous views of a long-billed wren babbler. We also glimpsed a male red-headed trogon, a mountain hawk eagle passed overhead, and a female scarlet-breasted woodpecker appeared by the roadside. Mammals included this Himalayan striped squirrel, another stop at a waterfall produced a blue whistling thrush. Despite the bright start, rain was never far away, just about endured by this male chestnut-bellied rock thrush. Once the rain eased, the splendours of this wonderful environment were again evident. We waited for the lifting mist to reveal a stunning waterfall. It drops below the Nganglam Death Road, so named due to the fate of many workers during its construction. Nearby was a chawton, a memorial to a bus full of monks which fell off the same road. Our route took us further along the Limithang Road to Senghor, via the pass at Lalong. A mixed flock at the pass included stripe-throated euhenas. White-browed fulvetas, and a couple of bar-throated minlers. They're also known as chestnut-tailed minler, however bar-throated seems more appropriate. Plus this male green-tailed sunbird. We took lunch on the far side of the pass. Later, despite the return of the rain, a trio of wonderful satyr tragopans appeared by the roadside. They are undoubtedly one of Bhutan's star birds, and we felt justifiably rewarded for tolerating the dreadful weather. They often come to roadsides to eat grit as an aid to their diet. As is typical of the family, the males are magnificent beasts. Unfortunately, the females are rather drab by comparison. We arrived at our campsite at Senghor at around 3,000 metres in the late afternoon, complete with chanting monks and a warm room for dinner. When we rose in the morning, the vista from the campsite looked pretty much like it had the night before, drizzle and low cloud. Senghor is a small village, surrounded by cultivation and pasture, and much liked by red-billed choughs. From here we were heading towards the Bumthang Valleys around Chakar. It wasn't long before we stopped for more sumptuous views of a magnificent male satyr tragopan in the roadside forest. If anything, this one was showing better than the ones we'd seen the previous afternoon. Our high hopes of birding the pass at Thrumsengla along the way were being thwarted by the weather. A male blood pheasant appeared in the mist, reward for our dogged persistence. The race here are much less yellowish-green below and have a redder breast than those we'd seen at Pele. Tracking mixed flocks revealed coal tits. Plenty of stripe-throated euhenas. They are usually the commonest euhenia in the boreal zone. buff-barred warbler, and a brief but much appreciated fire-tailed sunbird. At the top of the pass, we could only guess at the vistas obscured by the cloud. A migrant greenish warbler was found here. Along with a nice male white-browed bush robin. There was much debate over the pickers we saw here. This one was clearly a Royals picker. But another much larger and greyer-headed individual went unidentified. As we descended the far side of the pass, we encountered more blood pheasants. An amazing 22 in total, of which this one showed best. Our ground crew found us another excellent spot for lunch. Moving on, open fir forests dominated the habitat, usually with a good understory of rhododendron, and home to common crossbills. This male was rather dull and possibly already in post-breeding molt. And the females here seem to show more grey than western birds. Two more were found feeding on the wall of a bridge. It wasn't entirely clear what they were eating, either small seeds caught in the moss or even the moss itself. Both seemed to be young birds from the previous spring, as the female still showed some residual streaking, and the male an obvious green tone and brown wings. A mixed flock nearby allowed good views of rufous-fronted bush tits, as well as grey-crested tits. As we dropped down to the Bumthang valleys, there were lots of grey-backed shrikes. Our base for the night was in Chakar, the main town in the valley region, at the very pleasant Lekki guest house. After breakfast, we had a relaxing hour or so exploring this typical rural Bhutanese town. As we left the valley, a close Eurasian hoopoe necessitated a quick stop. Driving west, we decided to make a detour up to the monastery at Tharpawling. It sits at over 3,000 metres, and from its courtyard we saw an unfilmable Himalayan monal on the upper hillsides. Sadly, rain had swept in, and although a couple of oriental turtle doves sat it out, viewing anything else soon became almost impossible. As the rain turned to sleet, an olive-backed pipit was even hardier, but we were soon scurrying back to the van. In the lower forest, conditions were a little better. A male Mrs. Gould's sunbird was enticed into view. And David's owl imitation also called in a white-browed fulvetta. Back on the main road, we hoped for better conditions over the pass at Trongsa. It was not to be, but somehow the ground crew had again constructed somewhere for us to have lunch. Determined not to be deterred by the weather, afternoon birding stops uncovered rufous-vented euhenas and red-headed bullfinches. Only males show any reddish coloration on the head, and that's on the crown. Females have a yellowish crown. Later we found an attractive male red-tailed minler, as well as bar-throated minler, and then a lemon-rumped warbler. It was a tough drive to get to our next overnight stop at Trongsa, but we arrived with enough time to see the famous dzong here. It's the largest in the country and was formerly the seat of power in Bhutan. Our excellent hotel was situated further along the valley, with a female scarlet-breasted woodpecker near the entrance. Views across to the mountains, up the valley, and back to the dzong. Dawn revealed more low cloud, but at least it wasn't actually raining. Yet. The road west from Trongsa takes a long loop around the head of the valley, meaning the dzong is still in view from the other side, a good hour or so later. We were soon into the Black Mountain Reserve, with its spectacular waterfalls. A great place for breakfast, and this whistler's warbler. Plus a plain-crowned jay. We took a break at the Chendipji Chorten. It's modelled on the stupa at Kathmandu and supposedly covers the remains of an evil spirit that was subdued here. From Chendipji, we drove up to Pele. Close to the summit, we pulled in to look at a buzzard perched on a small pine. Dark morphs like this can be very hard to identify, and we weren't sure if this was a Himalayan or even an upland buzzard. But the extent of white in the wings and just visible tail pattern suggest it's an eastern buzzard, a migrant that breeds in East Asia and winters in Southern Asia. This area was good for raptors, as we also saw our first Himalayan griffon vultures. And joining them briefly, an immature lammergeier being mobbed by a large-billed crow. What by now we considered to be normal weather greeted us at the crest of the pass. But we nonetheless ventured out along the old road. The rhododendron-covered slopes here were our last chance for a few high-altitude species, so we stuck it out. A rosy pipit was preening by the path, just beginning to develop the pinkish wash on the breast of breeding plumage. A male green shrike babbler was amongst a mixed flock. Along with a yellow-browed tit. Rufous-fronted bush tit. And striped-throated euhenas. A pair of Himalayan white-browed rose finches also rewarded our perseverance. This is the female. The brighter male was also seen, but too briefly to film. Soon followed by a yellowish-browed female crimson-browed finch, one of two present. Plus more red-headed bullfinches. Across Pele, we then continued west via the Dangchu Valley towards Wongdi Pho Drang. Along the way, another waterfall stop. Another forktail, this time our first spotted forktail. Not far away was this dark-sided flycatcher, a species seen previously, but this one was particularly tame. Also a green-backed tit, foraging around broken bark. And another confiding black-throated bush tit. Then back to the Puna Sang Chu, where the Hotel Lobeza provided fine views across the valley. Our last full day and a glimpse of the Himalayas. Well, briefly. The dawn chorus included a rusty-cheeked scimitar babbler. And plenty of common miners. After a leisurely breakfast, we began the drive back to Paro, stopping for a flock of white-throated laughing thrushes. Followed by extraordinary views of a Hodgson's hawk cuckoo. Uncommon and elusive at the best of times, we hadn't even heard one previously, yet this individual perched out in the open. It was still there when we eventually decided to move on. At lunch at the botanical gardens below Dochu La, it was farewell to our brilliant ground crew. And their goodbye was a song in our honour. Being the weekend and early afternoon, the top of Dokchula was busy by Bhutanese standards. We enjoyed the views and moved on. We took the new road between Thimphu and Paro through the region's dry valleys. And found a Himalayan goral feeding on one of the hillsides. We arrived at Paro late afternoon and settled in back at the Hotel Drukchen, and with enough time to scan the valley and watch the resident grey-backed shrike, enjoying eating ants crawling around a pine tree. This was our last night in Bhutan, and an end to a memorable 3 weeks in this wonderful, friendly country.